There comes a moment in every woman's life when pain stops being just something that happened to you and becomes the very place where God starts reshaping you. The breaking doesn't feel holy. It doesn't feel purposeful. It feels like something is being taken, stripped, undone. But what if the breaking isn't punishment? What if it's preparation? What if the very crushing you're trying to survive is the doorway into who you were always meant to become? God does not waste suffering. He does not casually allow the breaking of a woman he has chosen. When God breaks a woman, it's because heaven is preparing to use her in a way that whole, unbroken, untouched women could never understand. Your tears are not random. Your heartbreak is not meaningless. And the valley you're walking through is not the end. It's the birthing room of a new you. There are seasons when life doesn't just bend you, it breaks you. Not slightly, not gently, but deeply enough that you feel like a part of you will never quite be the same again. And in those moments, it is easy to believe that brokenness equals disqualification, that somehow because your heart shattered, your plans unraveled, your confidence collapsed, or your world turned upside down, you are now less usable, less chosen, less capable of being a vessel God can work through. But what if the opposite is true? What if the breaking was not meant to destroy you, but to expose the strength that had been lying dormant inside you all along? Because there are parts of you that only appear under pressure. There are depths inside you that only awaken in the crushing. There is a resilience, a voice, a purpose, a calling that only comes alive when everything you leaned on falls away. Breaking removes illusions. Before the breaking, you believed your security came from people, titles, relationships, approval, control, or your own ability to hold it together. But when those things collapse, you are left face to face with the truth of what really sustains you. You discover that strength was never the absence of pain, but the decision to keep breathing in the middle of it. You discover that faith isn't proven when everything is smooth, but when you're standing in the ruins saying, I still believe there is purpose here, even if I can't see it yet. And in that raw, honest place, God begins to reveal what he already placed inside you. He shows you the courage you didn't know you had. He shows you the endurance you never had to use before. He shows you the depth of your spirit, the fire in your soul, the power in your voice. The breaking introduces you to the woman you were always capable of becoming. Sometimes God allows breaking because the version of you that existed before the pain could not carry the weight of the calling that is coming. Maybe you were too dependent on validation. Maybe you were shrinking yourself to be accepted. Maybe you were avoiding your truth. Maybe you were living small because you feared being seen. Breaking removes the layers that kept you safe, but also kept you silent. It strips away the performances. It exposes the wounds you used to hide behind strength. And in that exposing, God is not shaming you, he is freeing you. Because you cannot heal what you refuse to face, and you cannot step into purpose while still being chained to the fear of being hurt again. There is also a humility that comes through breaking. Before pain, you might have judged others quietly in your mind. You might have assumed you would have handled things better if you were in their shoes. But once you've cried prayers you can't even put into words, once you've felt your chest ache from grief, once you've walked through the fire and realized you could not save yourself, compassion begins to grow. You start seeing people differently. You listen deeper. You love softer. You extend grace more freely. And that heart posture is exactly what God uses when he wants to reach others through you. Breaking also teaches surrender. As long as you still believe you can control everything, you will continue striving, forcing, pushing, and carrying loads that were never yours. But when breaking happens, control slips through your fingers. And as terrifying as that is, it creates space for trust. You begin to discover what it means to lean not on your own understanding, but on a strength greater than your own. You stop pretending you're fine. You stop wearing the mask. You let God meet you where you actually are, not where you pretend to be. And in doing so, you find a peace that doesn't make sense, a calm that doesn't match your circumstances, a hope that refuses to die no matter how dark the night feels. Pain has a way of stripping away the surface layers of our faith and forcing us into the deep end. When everything is calm and predictable, it's easy to talk about trust, surrender, purpose, and strength. It's easy to say you believe God is working all things together for your good when everything still looks like it's working. But when pain walks in, when disappointment sits at your table, when loss knocks the breath out of your lungs, when betrayal leaves you bleeding internally, suddenly faith isn't a theory anymore. It becomes a lifeline. Pain has a unique assignment. It matures who you are on the inside long before the outside changes. It asks questions you never had to ask before. It forces you to evaluate what you truly believe, not just what you say you believe. And in the tension between the ache and the unknown, spiritual maturity is born. Pain takes you into the deeper layers of your identity. Before the breaking, you may have defined yourself by what you do, who you love, how well you perform, or how stable your life appears to be. But when those things are shaken, you begin to see that identity built on temporary things will always be fragile. Pain dismantles false identity. It pulls the rug from under roles, titles, applause, relationships, and control until you are left facing the truest version of yourself. And that can feel terrifying because you realize how much of your worth you had tied to things that could be taken away. But in that exposure, something holy begins to happen. You start asking deeper questions. Who am I when nothing is working? Who am I without the validation I used to depend on? Who am I when I don't feel strong, confident, or composed? Pain does not answer those questions for you, but it creates the space where God can. Spiritual maturity isn't about pretending pain doesn't hurt. It's not smiling through tears you never acknowledge. It's not posting scripture online while silently bleeding inside. Real maturity is the ability to sit with pain and still choose trust, to feel the sting without running back to old coping mechanisms, to allow God to work in the very places you once tried to numb or ignore. Pain develops a deeper spiritual awareness because it slows you down. It forces you to feel. It makes you pay attention. You begin to notice your triggers, your patterns, your wounds, your fears. You start realizing where you've been self-protecting instead of surrendering. You become aware of the areas you never let God speak into because you were too afraid of what honesty would uncover. And slowly, as the process continues, you begin to see that pain can become a teacher, not a cruel one, not one that shames you, but one that reveals truth. Pain teaches you patience because you can't rush healing. It teaches you endurance because quitting doesn't make the ache disappear. It teaches you perspective because what used to matter so much suddenly feels small compared to what you're walking through. Pain matures your prayers. You pray differently when you're hurting. You stop asking only for comfort and start asking for clarity. You stop asking for quick fixes and begin asking for transformation. You're no longer satisfied with surface level faith. You want depth. You want truth. You want God in a real way. Pain also develops emotional maturity. Before, maybe you used to react out of insecurity or lash out from fear or shut down when you felt misunderstood. Pain has a way of humbling your reactions. When your heart has been broken deeply enough, you begin to value peace over proving a point. You begin to value healing over being right. You begin to value growth over comfort. Pain stretches your capacity to feel without being controlled by what you feel. You learn to sit in the discomfort without running, numbing, or breaking everything around you. And while that process is uncomfortable, it produces a strength that doesn't roar loudly, but stands quietly and firmly in truth. Pain deepens your relationship with God because it brings you to the end of yourself. When you can't fix it, can't control it, can't make it make sense, you either collapse under the weight of it or lean into a presence that holds you when nothing else can. And in that place, intimacy grows, not because everything becomes clear, but because you realize you are held even when it isn't. Pain teaches you to listen, to be still, to hear God not just in miracles, but in the silence between your questions. Pain makes you honest in prayer. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You start showing up as you actually are, broken, uncertain, hurting, hopeful, and desperate for direction. And God meets you there, not with condemnation, but with compassion. Pain also reveals purpose in ways comfort never could. When you've walked through the fire and survived, something inside you shifts. You begin to recognize that your story holds weight. Your journey carries wisdom. Your wounds are not shameful. They are evidence of what you've come through. And that awareness doesn't just mature you spiritually, it prepares you to pour into others who are silently fighting battles you now understand from the inside. Pain turns you into someone safe for others, someone who doesn't judge their weakness or rush their healing, someone who understands that maturity isn't perfection, but awareness, humility, and surrender in the middle of the journey. What feels like rejection often carries a hidden purpose. When someone turns away from you, when doors close that you thought would remain open, when people fail you, disappoint you, or leave you in ways you never anticipated, it can feel like the world has conspired against you. You wonder if you were too much, not enough, or simply invisible. You start asking questions like, why me? Or why now? Or will I ever belong somewhere? Rejection strikes at the core of identity because humans are wired to seek acceptance, connection, and validation. But when rejection happens, God is sometimes redirecting you to a place you could never have found on your own. What feels like a loss or a turning away is often a divine repositioning, a preparation for a purpose that is bigger than you can currently see. Rejection exposes the limitations of human approval. You realize that people, no matter how close or trusted, cannot define your worth. Their opinions, decisions, and actions are not the measure of who you are. When rejection hits, you are forced to stop leaning on the temporary and start anchoring yourself in something eternal. It is painful because it strips away familiar comfort, but it is necessary because it teaches you to rely on God's approval instead of human applause. There is freedom in understanding that when a door closes, it is not a verdict on your ability, value, or potential. It is often a divine intervention, a reroute to something better aligned with your calling and your growth. Rejection also cultivates resilience. When life refuses to go as planned, when people betray trust or turn cold, when you expected warmth, you learn to get back up. You learn to stand even when the ground shakes beneath your feet. You begin to understand that your destiny is not dependent on someone else's recognition or acceptance, but on your perseverance and faithfulness. Rejection forces the cultivation of inner strength. It makes you take stock of who you are without the validation of the crowd, without applause, without encouragement from external sources. And in that space, you discover a resolve you didn't know existed, a stubborn faith that refuses to quit even when the world seems indifferent to your journey. What feels like rejection also forces reflection and discernment. Often it requires that you examine why doors closed, why relationships ended, or why opportunities were withdrawn. Instead of remaining bitter or blaming yourself or others, rejection invites you to ask the difficult questions. Was this truly meant for me? Am I being led somewhere else? What am I missing that I could only learn through this disappointment? These moments of reflection are formative because they shape your choices in the future. They teach you to recognize alignment with purpose rather than simply following convenience or temporary comfort. They help you prioritize what is truly essential and prepare you for what is significant. Rejection fosters humility. When you are turned away or excluded, it becomes clear that you are not in control of every circumstance and that some outcomes are beyond your personal influence. This humility is crucial because it softens pride and strengthens reliance on divine timing. You begin to understand that life's timing and placement are orchestrated in ways far greater than your own planning. Rejection teaches patience and trust, showing that being denied by man does not mean being abandoned by God. It reframes your perspective, turning what could have been a moment of despair into a strategic pivot toward your ultimate purpose. Rejection also sharpens empathy. When you have been hurt, left out, or dismissed, you gain insight into the struggles of others who face similar experiences. You develop the ability to connect with those who feel unseen, unheard, or unappreciated. Your own encounters with rejection cultivate a heart that can extend compassion, encouragement, and understanding where it is most needed. The empathy born from rejection allows you to minister to pain, guide those in doubt, and stand as an example of endurance and hope. It equips you to turn your past wounds into a source of strength for others, transforming personal loss into collective empowerment. Finally, what feels like rejection often realigns you with your true purpose. Sometimes the people, opportunities, or circumstances you clung to were distractions, detours, or compromises. Their removal opens a path that is more authentic and in harmony with your calling. Rejection forces you to pause, recalibrate, and redirect your energy toward the doors God intends to open. It teaches discernment, deepens character, and strengthens faith. While it is never easy to feel turned away, the pain of rejection often carries a hidden blessing, a divine redirection that leads you into spaces and experiences that are far greater than what you lost, far more transformative than what you imagined, and far more aligned with who you are meant to become. God rebuilds you on a foundation that pain can't shake, a foundation that is stronger than fear, doubt, or disappointment. There is a pattern in life that few people recognize. Destruction often precedes reconstruction. Before the masterpiece can emerge, the broken pieces must first be collected, examined, and carefully arranged into something stronger than before. God doesn't rebuild haphazardly. He takes the fragments of your heart, the shattered dreams, the mistakes, and the moments of weakness, and he weaves them into a foundation that is unshakable. The process often feels painful because it requires letting go of old attachments, old habits, and old mindsets. But the purpose behind the rebuilding is precision, not punishment. The foundation that God lays is built to withstand storms, trials, and pressures that would have once left you crumbling. When you experience deep pain, the natural instinct is to protect yourself, to avoid vulnerability, and to cling to what feels safe. But a true rebuilding cannot happen on a surface that is already rigid or hardened by fear. The breaking and the discomfort are necessary so that God can remove the temporary and unstable structures in your life and replace them with a base that is eternal. Every tear, every loss, every heartbreak, every setback becomes raw material for the reconstruction. The cracks in your heart are not imperfections to hide. They are openings for God's design to shine through. You begin to understand that the brokenness itself is part of the blueprint. What feels like devastation is actually the careful preparation of a resilient framework that cannot be shaken by external circumstances. Rebuilding requires patience because the process is deliberate. God doesn't rush restoration because rushed reconstruction leads to fragile structures. He works meticulously, aligning every piece, reshaping what was once bent, and reinforcing what is weak. In this process, he teaches you endurance, faith, and trust. You begin to see that your growth isn't measured by how quickly you recover, but by how deeply you are transformed in the process. The patience you develop during rebuilding is more than just waiting. It is a conscious choice to allow God to work on your character, perspective, and spirit while the external chaos tries to pull you down. Patience becomes strength, and strength becomes the invisible foundation that carries you when life tests your limits. The foundation that God builds is impervious to pain because it is rooted in truth rather than circumstances. Many people build their lives on approval, material success, relationship, or social status, but these things are temporary and unreliable. When loss, betrayal, or disappointment comes, a foundation built on these things collapses easily. God, however, rebuilds you on principles that are unshakable. He roots you in purpose, identity, and his presence. He builds your confidence in what is eternal rather than what is fleeting. You begin to operate from a place of security that cannot be taken, a peace that cannot be disrupted, and a faith that does not depend on the opinions or actions of others. This foundation transforms how you respond to challenges because you are no longer reactive to life's pressures. You are anchored in what is unmovable. Rebuilding also teaches you discernment. As God reconstructs your life, you become more aware of what should remain and what must be released. Not every relationship, every habit, or every belief aligns with the new structure he is creating. Some things need to be removed so the foundation is not compromised. This process can feel uncomfortable because letting go often comes with grief. But in the release, clarity emerges. You learn to identify what is essential and what is merely a distraction. You learn to prioritize what will endure and discard what will collapse under pressure. Discernment becomes a tool in the rebuilding process, allowing you to navigate life with wisdom and intentionality rather than fear or impulse. Another critical aspect of being rebuilt on a strong foundation is resilience. The foundation God establishes in your life is not just for stability. It is for empowerment. Once you are rebuilt, storms that would have once shaken you no longer have the same effect. Challenges become opportunities to demonstrate faith, setbacks become lessons in strength, and opposition becomes fuel for growth. You begin to understand that God's rebuilding process is not merely about repairing what was lost, it is about elevating you beyond where you were before. The foundation becomes a platform for influence, service, and impact that could not have been possible in your former state. Pain and brokenness were not the end. They were the preparation for something far greater. Rebuilding also cultivates humility and gratitude. As God restores what has been broken, you recognize that it is not by your own strength that you endure, but by His power working through you. You learn to depend on Him rather than relying solely on yourself. Gratitude grows as you see the intricacy of the restoration, the care with which every detail is addressed, and the wisdom behind what seemed like delays or detours. Humility and gratitude anchor you emotionally and spiritually, reinforcing the very foundation that God is constructing. You become grounded not in pride or self-sufficiency, but in understanding that your resilience, strength, and renewed purpose are the product of divine workmanship. Your breaking makes you compassionate, powerful, and spiritually aware in ways that nothing else can. When life shatters expectations, steals security, and leaves you in the raw edges of pain, it does something profound. It opens your heart to realities that you could never understand while everything was comfortable. Compassion is born in the crucible of suffering. Before the breaking, it's easy to love superficially, to empathize at a distance, or to extend grace only when it costs little. But when you have been crushed, betrayed, abandoned, or deeply disappointed, your heart begins to soften in ways that are unmistakable. You begin to notice the invisible wounds in others, the silent struggles, the unspoken battles, and the quiet cries that go unheard. Pain trains your spirit to see beyond surface appearances, to hear what is unsaid, and to respond with a depth of care that is rare and transformative. What once seemed small or insignificant now resonates deeply because you have felt the weight of similar experiences yourself. Breaking also produces power that is often hidden from those who have never endured real adversity. Strength that is forged in comfort is limited and fragile, but strength born through trials is unshakable. You realize that surviving does not just make you resilient, it makes you unstoppable in your purpose. You are no longer intimidated by the storms because you have walked through darkness and emerged still standing. Your voice gains authority, not because you seek it, but because people recognize the depth of your experience. Your confidence is no longer superficial or performative. It is grounded in the knowledge that you have faced impossible situations and endured. Power, in this sense, is not about dominance or control. It is about presence, influence, and the ability to hold space for truth, justice, and wisdom in a world that often resists it. The more you have been broken, the more capable you become of standing firm when it matters most. Spiritual awareness is another gift of the breaking process. When life forces you into moments you cannot control, you are confronted with the reality of the unseen. The struggles you face become a lens through which you begin to perceive the deeper currents of life, the divine orchestration of circumstances, and the subtle ways in which guidance, protection, and grace operate even when it is not obvious. Breaking sharpens your sensitivity to the voice of God, to the nudges of conscience, and to the promptings of your spirit. You begin to discern between what is fleeting and what is eternal, between temporary solutions and lasting truth, between people and purposes that build and those that break. Spiritual awareness transforms how you respond, how you prioritize, and how you navigate life. It is an awareness born not of reading or studying alone, but of walking through the fires and being forced to rely on something beyond yourself. Breaking also refines your empathy. When you have been deeply wounded, You no longer measure others' experiences by your own convenience or comfort. You understand the exhaustion of waiting, the sting of betrayal, the heaviness of unfulfilled dreams, and the quiet despair that can accompany unseen struggles. This lived experience creates a capacity for connection that is profound and authentic. People are drawn to your presence because they feel understood without needing to explain everything. Your compassion becomes a bridge, a place of refuge, and a channel through which others can encounter healing. The lessons of your pain ripple outward, impacting relationships, communities, and even generations, because the depth of understanding you develop becomes a conduit for restoration in ways that words alone could never achieve. Breaking also teaches discernment in relationships, opportunities, and choices. Once you have experienced disappointment and loss, you begin to recognize patterns, motives, and intentions with greater clarity. Your judgment becomes refined, not harsh, but wise. You are less likely to be manipulated, misled, or swayed by appearances, and more capable of navigating life with insight and integrity. This discernment empowers you to invest in what is genuine, to protect your energy, and to pursue paths that align with your calling and your values. What might have once seemed like misfortune now becomes an opportunity to develop wisdom, patience, and the ability to act with purpose rather than react impulsively. Breaking also cultivates gratitude and humility. As you encounter trials that push you beyond your comfort zone, you begin to recognize the value of small mercies, the presence of unseen provision, and the ways in which even suffering carries seeds of growth. Gratitude shifts your perspective from bitterness to understanding, from resentment to reflection, and from despair to hope. Humility emerges naturally when you recognize that your strength and your resilience are not products of your own effort alone, but of endurance, guidance, and grace that sustain you even in your weakest moments. This humility makes your power more authentic, your compassion more real, and your spiritual awareness more accessible, because you are no longer operating from ego, pride, or illusion. You are operating from the place of someone who has seen, endured, and survived. Finally, the combination of compassion, power, and spiritual awareness positions you to impact the world in ways that would have been impossible without the breaking. Your influence is no longer measured by titles, achievements, or recognition, but by the depth of your character, the authenticity of your presence, and the capacity of your heart. People sense your resilience and your empathy. They are drawn to the light that emerges from your own darkness. Your journey becomes a testimony not only of survival, but of transformation, and your pain, once a burden, becomes a gift that equips you to help others navigate theirs, creating a legacy of strength, understanding, and hope that extends far beyond yourself. God trusts you with pain because he intends to trust you with influence, responsibility, and purpose in ways that would be impossible without the trials you face. There is a pattern that is consistent throughout every story of transformation. God does not give authority or impact to the untested. Strength, wisdom, discernment, and spiritual insight are rarely cultivated in comfort or ease. They are forged in the crucible of struggle, molded through suffering, and sharpened by endurance. The pain you endure is not random. It is a preparation for the responsibility that lies ahead. God allows you to walk through challenges not to punish you, but to train you to lead with integrity, empathy, and courage when the time comes. The experiences that shake you, humble you, or even break you are the very same experiences that equip you to guide, uplift, and influence others in ways that are meaningful and lasting. Pain teaches the value of patience, perseverance, and perspective. When God entrusts you with influence, it is never just for personal gain or recognition. Influence requires responsibility, and responsibility requires maturity. Without the lessons learned through hardship, it is easy to misuse authority, make decisions based on selfish motives, or misunderstand the weight of leadership. Experiencing pain firsthand cultivates humility, empathy, and discernment, qualities essential for anyone who will lead, inspire, or impact the lives of others. You learn to weigh decisions not just with intellect, but with insight that comes from lived experience. You become capable of seeing beyond the immediate circumstances to the long-term consequences, both for yourself and for those you serve. When God allows you to endure difficulty, He also teaches you to rely on His presence and guidance in ways that would not be necessary if life were always smooth. Trust develops when the easy answers disappear, when control slips from your hands, and when nothing seems to make sense. That trust becomes the foundation upon which influence is built. People who can navigate life with wisdom, grace, and patience under pressure become a source of stability for others. They can speak truth without arrogance, lead without dominance, and inspire without performance. Their authority is not rooted in ego, social status, or external validation, but in resilience, insight, and the credibility that comes from surviving and thriving despite challenges. God trusts those who have been broken because He knows they understand the value of what they are being given, and they will not take it lightly. Pain also clarifies priorities, which is essential for influence. When you are tested, your true values are revealed. What matters most becomes unmistakably clear, and distractions are exposed for what they are. This clarity allows you to lead with purpose rather than impulse, to mentor and guide with intention rather than assumption, and to build legacies that are rooted in truth rather than expediency. People who have endured trials often see the bigger picture and are able to align their actions with eternal principles rather than fleeting desires. They become capable of making decisions that honor both God and humanity because their experiences have shaped their moral compass, strengthened their judgment, and deepen their understanding of the human condition. Experiencing pain also cultivates resilience, which is necessary for influence. Life will test you repeatedly, and those who wield influence without resilience are often undone by the very challenges that shape their authority. Pain develops the endurance to face opposition, rejection, and disappointment without giving up. It trains the heart and mind to remain steady under pressure, to make measured decisions in the face of adversity, and to provide guidance when others are overwhelmed by fear or confusion. God trusts those who have endured because they have been proven capable of holding themselves together when circumstances are chaotic, and they can therefore hold others together when guidance and strength are most needed. Pain also creates credibility. People are drawn to those who have walked the path they now face, who have survived the storms, and who can speak from experience rather than theory. Those who have known hardship can offer hope, perspective, and instruction that resonates deeply because it is authentic. Influence requires more than words. It requires a life that testifies to endurance, growth, and wisdom. The trust God places in you after trials is often reflected in the trust others place in you because authenticity is magnetic. People follow those who have experienced life fully, who understand struggle, and who can navigate both triumph and setback with integrity. Finally, God trusts those who have been through pain because He is preparing them for impact that goes beyond themselves. Personal victories and restored circumstances are not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is the ability to serve, uplift, and inspire others. Pain equips you with insight, compassion, and discernment that can transform communities, guide generations, and shape legacies. Those who have endured are uniquely positioned to step into roles of leadership, mentorship, and influence with a level of authenticity, authority, an understanding that could not be cultivated in ease. The weight of responsibility, the power to affect change, and the ability to lead with grace are given to those who have proven themselves through endurance, trust, and faithfulness under pressure, demonstrating that God's intention is not merely to restore you, but to use you as a vessel for greater purpose.